All right, we're keeping it simple today with some dynasty moves to make. I've got 5 players for you to either buy or sell with multiple specific trade ideas for each one. So if you're looking for ways to make your team just a little bit better before the season arrives, stick with me here. My name is Paul. This is Pure Potential. If you enjoyed today's video, make sure to subscribe to the channel, leave a like, leave a comment. Let's go. Like I said in the intro, I've got 5 players for you today, 3 sells and 2 buys. I'm saving the best for last, one of my absolute favorite contending targets right now, so stick around for that. But we're going to start with Kyren Williams, who, if you've seen my content before, you probably know is falling into the sell category for me. Over on fantasycalc.com, which I will be using as my proxy for the current dynasty market value of these players, Kyren ranks as the 50th overall player, the RB11. And yes, before you rush down to the comment section to let me know, I am aware that Kyren Williams has finished as a top 10 scoring running back each of the last 2 seasons. However, my job is to figure out what players are going to do in the future. And I'm just not sure how much longer Kyren can keep this scam going. And don't get me wrong, I do not think Kyren Williams is a bad running back. I don't think he is like a net negative to his NFL team. But he's also not an elite running back. He's really not even close to an elite running back. I would say he's a pretty average player in most facets of the game. And yet in 2024, Kyren Williams ranked first among all running backs in snap share by a lot, honestly, 86.4%. The next closest was Jonathan Taylor at 79%. And he tied for first in carry percentage of all of his team's rush attempts, again with Jonathan Taylor at 73.7%. Now, I understand the NFL is not a perfect meritocracy. Usage and talent are not always going to be as closely correlated as we might like, especially at the running back position where volume can be kind of arbitrary at times. But there is simply no argument that Kyren Williams deserves to have the best running back role in the league. He doesn't deserve to have usage that puts him number 1 in these categories. Number 1 snap share, number 1 in carries. Let's just look at a couple of metrics that show some of the flaws in Kyren Williams as a player. First of all, he was second in fumbles last year among all running backs with 100 or more attempts. So even if you're trying to positively spin Kyren's very ho-hum athleticism and say he's just a reliable back, that wasn't even true last year. He wasn't even a very reliable running back last year, but he also is one of the least explosive backs in the NFL. I mean, this was clear from his athletic testing when he came out as a prospect, but last year he ranked 44th out of 46 running backs that had 100 or more carries in explosive run percentage. And he is not in good company here if you look at the list. From the bottom of the list working up, we have Gus Edwards, Kareem Hunt, Kyren Williams, Nick Chubb, injured Nick Chubb, Alexander Mattison, David Montgomery, Javonte Williams. These are not your big play threats. Okay, and Kyren Williams certainly has not been a big play threat in his career. He is reliant on getting a ton of carries and a lot of those coming near the goal line. That is how Kyren has managed to get into the top 10 in back-to-back seasons. And you can say none of this matters. The talent questions don't matter because Sean McVay just loves this guy. And maybe that's true. Love is a strange thing. The heart wants what it wants. Maybe this just continues in perpetuity. It's not something I want to bet on. Okay, the Rams drafted Jarquez Hunter after they drafted Blake Corum last year. McVay was talking up Jarquez Hunter a ton. We still have not gotten an extension for Kyren Williams that was talked about as a possibility. It has not happened yet. The McVay loyalty angle is just way too thin for me at these prices, especially when Kyren's upside is fairly capped. Like even last year, number 1 in the league in carry percentage. He scored 14 touchdowns. He was still just the RB9 in points per game at 17.2. And the reason his upside is capped is because the Rams just don't throw to running backs. Like you can look at this tweet here from JJ Zacharyson. It's from December, but it's still very relevant. It says the Rams are the only team in the league with a sub 10% running back target share. In the 5 seasons prior to this one, they ranked 32nd, 31st, 32nd, 30th, and 32nd in running back target share. The McVay system does not utilize running backs in the passing game. So Kyren needs all these carries and all of these touchdowns just to stay within the top 10. But there is no room for him to ascend into that like 20 points per game range because he does not catch enough passes. So the bottom line here is just, I don't think Kyren Williams is that good. He's certainly not good enough to deserve the amount of volume that he has received over the past 2 years. And I'm not willing to sink that much of my value into a fragile player who doesn't really have a path to league winning upside. Like you look at Christian McCaffrey, who I just talked about in my last video as a guy I'm very open to buying. And Christian McCaffrey is fragile in a different way than Kyren, but his ceiling outcome is to be the most valuable player in fantasy. Kyren's ceiling outcome is basically to just be what he's been so far. He could fall into that RB7, RB8 type of range if he has another season just like 2024. He's not going to improve on that without more receiving work, and it's a lot easier for me to envision his role shrinking due to the fumbles, the lack of explosive runs, back-to-back years investing in round 3 and round 4 running backs. It's a lot easier for me to see the role getting smaller, even if it's just a little bit smaller, as opposed to getting larger. I don't see room for his role to grow. So how do we sell Kyren Williams? It's fine to just say a player is a sell, but today I wanted to be more actionable for you. So I'm going to give you 3 suggestions for every single player of how to actually buy or sell them. And the first suggestion I would make is to trade Kyren Williams away for any first round pick. Now, here's the thing about this suggestion. The market dictates that Kyren Williams is actually worth quite a bit more than a random first round pick. So you can feel free to get greedy here. You can try for a first and a second. But the bottom line is Kyren Williams falls outside of that range for me in my dynasty rankings. And if I'm holding him, I would rather cash him out for a first round pick that I can then hold on to or reinvest into a different player prior to the start of the NFL season. So I'm giving you my blessing. If your league is a little bit lower on Kyren than the market, if you can still get a first for him, I'm totally fine with that. My second suggestion would be to tier up. If you can add a second round pick to Kyren Williams to get Breece Hall or Trevion Henderson, I would absolutely do that. I think that those players are more talented. I think they have a higher scoring ceiling because they catch more passes. I think they're going to have more value insulation. These guys are not that far apart on Fantasy Calc. That is an easy trade that I would make every single time. Kyren plus a second for Henderson or Hall. And my final suggestion would be to tier down. If you can move into a Kenneth Walker, RJ Harvey, or Chase Brown, 3 guys that I have ranked ahead of Kyren, and get a plus on top, really any plus, but I would try for a second round pick. That I think is a smash move every day of the week. Again, I have him ranked behind those guys. So if you can trade him for those backs with a plus, I think you're making out very well in the long run. All right, my next suggestion today is to buy Tua Tagovailoa. 84th overall player on Fantasy Calc, QB 24 in the rankings. The fade has simply gone too far at this point. Okay, the truth is that Tua and the Dolphins were actually better last year than you remember when healthy. Even though Tyreek Hill was not 100% at any point last year, you look at the span of games that Tua came back from his concussion. He played in week 1 and then he got hurt early week 2. He came back in week 8 and played 9 games from week 8 to week 16. During that span, the Dolphins ranked 9th in the NFL in points per game. They were scoring 26 points per contest, and they were putting up 341 yards of total offense per game, which was 13th best. So this was not some disaster dumpster fire of an offense, which I feel like is what people think of when they remember the Dolphins last year. They were kind of boring. There were a lot of check downs to Jonnu Smith, but this was a functional offense. And more importantly, Tua was a very functional fantasy quarterback during that stretch. During those 9 games, 18.2 points per game from weeks 8 to 16. That's more than we saw from Justin Herbert last year, just behind Kyler Murray, Patrick Mahomes, and Brock Purdy's season-long points per game. Tua was averaging 264 yards per game, which, just as a point of reference, is the same number as Baker Mayfield last year. He was throwing for 7 yards per attempt, which is really not bad by any stretch. He had 17 touchdowns and just 4 interceptions during that stretch of games, despite having arguably the worst offensive line in the NFL. Now, is that offensive line going to be significantly better this year? I have no idea. Probably not an above average line, but it also might not be like literally the worst line in the league. And he still has Tyreek Hill. He still has Jalen Waddle. He still has Devon Achane. And again, he was fantasy viable last year, regardless of the line play. And the company line from the Dolphins this offseason has been protect Tua, get the ball out quick. The team knows what they have to do. They know that Tua can't afford to take hits, and nobody knows better than Tua. Okay, he's been consistent this offseason. He has no interest in retiring. He's not stepping away from football. He's been taking lessons to learn how to fall better, how to avoid hits. I think we're going to see a much more cautious quarterback who knows that there's a lot on the line here. At this point in the dynasty market, these concerns that a concussion is going to end his career have really overcorrected his price, which is really my point here. And getting beyond just the points scored, looking at his contract, he signed this 4-year extension last July. It pretty much locks the team in through at least 2026. So though I've heard talk that, if Tua struggles this year, the team could go a different direction. That's always on the table, technically, for these teams, because even if you owe a quarterback a bunch of money, you can still go ahead and draft a rookie and you can kind of figure out the succession plan. But I don't think the Dolphins are going to lose enough games to be, in that top 5 conversation. And again, if they tried to cut him loose next year, that would be $99 million in dead cap. So I think it's extremely likely that Tua is the starter for at least 2 more seasons. And I would frankly be shocked if that was the end of Tua as a starting quarterback in the league. I think even if the Dolphins were ready to move on, as we've seen with all different kinds of journeyman quarterbacks like Kirk Cousins, Derek Carr, he will find a place. I mean, Daniel Jones is going to be a week 1 starter this year, for goodness sake. So I think the concerns that he's going to be out of football are just really overblown. I think when he plays, he is totally capable of giving you mid to high end QB2 numbers with some QB1 upside mixed in there. And his price is just very cheap. So here's how I would be looking to acquire Tua if you have a need at quarterback. The first way is to simply just draft him in a startup. I think he's a great target for your QB3 or even your QB2 if you maybe took an elite quarterback at the top like a Daniels or a Josh Allen. His ADP is 804. Again, QB24, just like Fantasy Calc. I just took him in a startup as my QB3 at the 811. I had Daniels on my team. I had Lawrence on my team. I really wasn't even thinking quarterback at that point, but he was just the clear best option on the board. So I went ahead and took him. Another option would be to tier down. If you have Jared Goff or Bryce Young, I think these 3 quarterbacks are at least in a similar range. Like, don't get me wrong. I think that Tua has more risk than those 2 guys. But if you could sell Goff or Bryce Young for Tua plus a second, I think that's a totally reasonable move. You're getting that extra second without necessarily giving up much production in 2025. And so the second is kind of insulating against whatever perceived risk that there is. I think it's a way to extract a little bit of extra value without sacrificing your production in 2025. And then the last option would be to pivot across positions. So if you have an extra wide receiver in the range of a DJ Moore, a Matthew Golden, Ricky Pearsall, even a Jamison Williams, I wouldn't be opposed to trading for Tua. Mike Evans, Jerry Jeudy, these are all guys, if you go to Fantasy Calc or even Startup ADP, they're all sort of in that same realm as Tua. So it takes a specific kind of roster construction where somebody's willing to just give up a quarterback without getting one back. But he's certainly the type of quarterback that someone could be worried about, could be looking to pivot away from. And I think it's an easy trade to send one of those types of wide receivers for him. Next up, we're going to sell Jerry Jeudy, the 91st overall player on Fantasy Calc, wide receiver 37. I just talked about him as an option to trade for Tua. So certainly that's one option if it fits your team. But let's just talk about what Jeudy did last year and why I think it's a little bit of a mirage. Undeniably, 2024 was the best season of Jerry Jeudy's career, over 1,200 receiving yards. But it wasn't as impressive as it looks on the surface if you dig in a little bit deeper. Because what gets missed here, beyond just the box score, beyond the total yards and receptions, is the sheer volume of routes run. And this is ultimately why I don't think Jeudy's going to replicate anything close to what we saw last year. Jerry Jeudy ran 669 routes last year. That was second in the NFL to only Jamar Chase. He ran 39.3 routes on a per game basis. This is all from the Fantasy Points data suite. The only other fantasy relevant wide receivers that were even close, and my close is an arbitrary 32 routes per game, so that's 7 less, but we'll call that close. DJ Moore, Garrett Wilson, Justin Jefferson, Jackson Smith-Njigba, Jacoby Myers, Malik Neighbors, and DK Metcalf. Outside of those guys, those 6 or 7 names that I just gave you, every other wide receiver was significantly behind in terms of routes run last year. And that's why it's helpful to go and look at the per route metrics, because that can kind of isolate what a wide receiver is actually doing talent-wise. What are they doing each time they get to run a route? And we can use that to project forward as we apply what we expect next season's route volume to be. So among all wide receivers last year with at least 300 routes run, so full-time players, Jerry Jeudy ranked 38th in targets per route run, 0.21. He ranked 35th in yards per route run, 1.84, and 45th in fantasy points per route run, 0.36. And all of those numbers were right in line with Judy's career averages, which is really what I'm trying to emphasize here. You can easily look at last season in comparison to his previous seasons and say that this was some big breakthrough where Judy took a step forward as a player and was significantly better this year than previous years. It's not true. His target earning, his efficiency per route, none of that stuff shows that he took a leap as a player. What happened is he stayed healthy for 17 games and he played for the team that led the NFL in dropbacks, led the NFL in pass attempts. That's what he did. And I'm not taking away from him that that happened, but I'm also not going to heavily bet on it happening again. And yes, the Browns will probably throw a lot this year too, but they're also projected for the lowest points per game in the NFL. And none of their quarterbacks are as fantasy friendly as Jameis Winston. Even if you think Joe Flacco could be close enough, he's not going to be playing in the fantasy playoffs. This team is going to be so far out of the playoff race. They will be starting Dylan Gabriel or Shadur Sanders by the fantasy playoffs. I guarantee you that. And now it's sounding like Kenny Pickett could actually win the job from week 1. So there's a chance we don't get any Joe Flacco this year. I mean, if it's Pickett, Gabriel, Sanders for the whole year, that is going to be absolutely brutal for the Browns pass catchers. But then also, Judy benefited last year from David Njoku missing games, from Cedric Tillman getting hurt right when he was breaking out. Those guys are back on the team, and they added Harold Fannin in round 3. He's probably going to run a lot of routes that went to whoever their backup tight end was last year, Jordan Akins, I think it might have been. So all of that is going to be more target competition. The quarterback play is going to be worse, or at the very least, less fantasy friendly. I think the overall pass attempts probably come down just through sheer regression. Like they had a ridiculous number of dropbacks. And the cherry on top here is that even when every single thing went right for Jerry Jeudy in 2024, he only scored 14.2 points per game. So as far as I'm concerned, the juice just isn't worth the squeeze here. And if I'm trying to sell him, my first option is to just liquidate into rookie picks. I think that you can trade him for a first, and I don't want to see you rolling your eyes at me because I went over to the Fantasy Calc trade database and the Keep Trade Cut trade database that pulls from real leagues. There are plenty of moves where Jeudy is sent basically straight up for a 2026 first because he is overvalued, and these first round picks are getting really undervalued. People are selling this 2026 class short. I would do that 100 out of 100 times. But I would also do, if you think you're in a league that's a bit sharper than that, is I'd happily combine Jeudy with a bench asset like Travis Etienne, Keon Coleman, Deebo Samuel, Brian Robinson. Put 2 guys like this together to get 1 first round pick. I think that's very doable, and it's something I would pretty much always do. But there are also a ton of players in this same value range that I like more than Jeudy. So if you're looking for more of a youth pivot option, pivot to a younger player, more upside, more value insulation. I love Josh Downs. I think he's a significantly better wide receiver who projects similarly this season, but long-term, I think has a lot more scoring upside. And a couple of rookies in Jaden Higgins and Luther Burden are also right there in terms of value. They could come in right away, put up a couple of big games, and they could be, gone from this range. They could jump multiple tiers. As far as a production pivot, because really, if you're rostering Jeudy, you're hoping for points. I think you can pivot to any of these other players and expect a better points above replacement at whatever position it might be. Justin Fields, Mike Evans, Devontae Adams, Alvin Kamara. If you can get any of those guys in a straight swap, I think you're looking at a much better point projection for 2025. So overall, I think there's a lot of ways that you can move Jerry Jeudy, and I think you're going to want to take advantage of what he did last season. Then we come to our last sell, which is David Montgomery, 104th overall player on Fantasy Calc, the RB24. He has been very solid for the Lions and for fantasy for the past 2 years, 15.9 and 14.9 points per game. Rock solid RB2 type of guy. But I think there's a number of factors in play that make me pretty wary of rostering Montgomery this year. Starting with his age, Montgomery's 28 years old. That's certainly not enough on its own to say he's an avoid. I'm not avoiding all 28-year-old running backs, but he is post-age apex. So at the very least, we can say at this point forward, there is risk that he could decline. And you pair that with last year's MCL sprain. He skipped surgery. He looked awful in the playoffs. Obviously, all the reporting is that he is back and he's healthy, but we don't know for sure. We haven't seen him on the field looking good since that injury. So there's at least some risk there with the age and the injury history. Then you have the potential offensive regression, which is an even bigger concern for me because it is very, very difficult, I might even say impossible, to stay as hot as the Lions have been over the past 2 seasons. It's extremely likely that touchdown regression was coming for this team, regardless of what they did this offseason. But then you send Ben Johnson out the door. I think it's inevitable that this team is going to score fewer touchdowns this year than they did last year or the year before that. And that's a big deal for Montgomery because he has scored 25 rushing touchdowns in his 28 regular season games for the Lions. That's a big problem if they're scoring fewer because he is heavily reliant on scoring touchdowns. And then the last thing is just Jahmyr Gibbs. He is absolutely that dude. I think he's the best running back in the NFL, but I don't think many people would argue he's top 3. And the team got an extended look at him in a more featured role down the stretch last year. And the results were absolutely electric. And so my question is, what if they just decide to keep that going? Or what if they at least move to something like a 60-40 split in favor of Gibbs rather than this real like 50-50 split that they've been using? I think that's what a rational team would do, given the talent disparity. Jahmyr Gibbs is significantly better than David Montgomery. It doesn't even make sense to use them in a 50-50 split. And so if they do move to a 60-40 split, which is not really even that dramatic, it would really hurt the floor and the ceiling of Montgomery's production. And you look at some comments from Dan Campbell and the new offensive coordinator, John Morton, this could be the case. Shout out to the Coach Speak Index Discord. Definitely check that out if you want to stay up to date on what coaches are saying. Dan Campbell talking about what John Morton wants to do, says he wants to isolate certain players. A lot of the focal point was Jamison Williams and Jahmyr Gibbs and Sam Laporta, among others. I thought we really honed in on their versatility and all the things that they can do. Now, that quote is not enough to suggest that Montgomery doesn't have a role or that he's being phased out of the offense. My point is that there's a collection of factors here, and if any one of them breaks away from Montgomery, it could really hurt his fantasy upside and his fantasy outlook in general. So I think Montgomery is more risky than the market would indicate right now. Not that he's going to completely disappear, but just that a change to his role or his efficiency could turn him from a solid RB2 option into more of a fancy handcuff in the vein of like a Zach Charbonnet or a Jalen Warren. So if I have David Montgomery, I'm looking to sell in a few ways. One is just liquidating for picks. Like I said with Judy, I'm fine taking like a second and a third round pick for Montgomery. You could try for 2 seconds. I think you can get it in some leagues. I would sell him for a second and a third. I think you can use those picks in season to go get a different running back if you need to. Otherwise, I'd be looking to tier up. What do I have to add to Montgomery to get to Chase Brown, to get to RJ Harvey or Kenneth Walker, one of these younger, more electric running backs that has a more clear runway to some serious upside? I'm not totally sure if just a second's going to get it done, but you could start at a second. You could try adding a little bit extra, maybe a third, maybe a bench player. See if you can get up to one of those guys that has some real juice. And then otherwise, I'll give you one pivot option at every position that is ranked basically right next to David Montgomery on Fantasy Calc. I'd rather have James Conner at running back. He's not that much older. He looked really good last year, and he is going to be the focal point of the Cardinals offense. Tucker Kraft at tight end, Trey Harris at wide receiver, and Geno Smith at quarterback. Those guys are all in the same range. I'd rather roster any one of those guys in a vacuum than David Montgomery. Now we're about to get into the final player of today's video, one of my favorite contending buys. But first, if you're interested in some more hands-on, personalized Dynasty advice, you can request a Dynasty team breakdown by going down to the description, clicking that link that's right at the top. And basically what this is, I will check out your team and your Dynasty League. I'll look at your roster size, your scoring settings, the players on your team, the picks on your team, try to come up with a plan for you, both in the upcoming season and in the long term. I'm going to type all that up. I'll put it into the breakdown template so it's easy to read and send it right over to you. So if you're interested in that, all the information's in that Google form. First link in the description. Go ahead and check that out. Our last player of the day is A.J. Brown. Again, one of my favorite buys, 35th overall player on Fantasy Calc, wide receiver 14. As you probably know, if you've ever watched A.J. Brown play football, he is ridiculously good. Just last year, he ranked second in yards per route run among all wide receivers with 200 or more routes. He was one of only 2 players above 3 yards per route run, along with Puka Nacua, who also happens to be pretty good at football. And A.J. Brown has never been below a 2.5 yards per route run in his entire career, which is a truly elite number. As you can see here, we get down to the 10th wide receiver on the list, and we're already pushing that 2.5 number. I think he's pretty undeniably a top 5 wide receiver in the league. I think you can make an argument for top 3. But the point here is that A.J. Brown already checks the most important box for fantasy production, which is talent. He has the talent necessary to put up a league winning type of season. His situation simply has not allowed for it. But even last year, on a team that ranked dead last in pass attempts per game, he was the wide receiver 12. He scored 16.7 PPR points per game. Now, keep in mind, the Eagles threw the ball 13 fewer times per game than the Bengals. Okay, the passing volume was ridiculously low last year. We still got a wide receiver 1 season out of A.J. Brown. In 2023, 2022, and 2020, he was at or above 17 points per game. So with A.J. Brown, you are locking in an extremely high floor of production, but you also have multiple obvious outs to huge upside. What if Saquon Barkley gets hurt? He racked up 485 touches last year, including the playoffs. He is 28 years old. I just talked about him in my last video. I think that his injury risk is being a little bit undersold. And if he did get hurt, what do the Eagles have behind him? Will Shipley? A.J. Dillon? If he got hurt, the team would have to turn to a more pass-heavy approach. They would have absolutely no choice. They can't give those backs 25 carries a game. It's just not an option. What if Devonta Smith gets hurt? I mean, that would just consolidate even more of those first read targets, even more of the passing game to A.J. Brown. That's certainly possible. What if the team naturally just regresses to a more pass-heavy approach because they're not blowing the doors off of every single opponent in the second half? They had like a 39% pass rate in the second half last year. That is not normal. That is not something that carries from one season to the next, and the schedule this year is more difficult. And finally, what if the team just consciously chooses to throw more because they're trying to keep Saquon Barkley fresh? Again, totally possible. We could see multiple of these things happen. We could see just one of them happen. But again, you can feel confident that A.J. Brown is giving you low-end wide receiver 1 production basically no matter what. But he has outs to that 18, 19, even 20 points per game ceiling that is very hard to find outside of the truly elite, mostly untouchable Dynasty wide receivers. So it's nice that he's a guy that's not impossible to trade for, that has this combination of floor and ceiling, and he just turned 28 years old. So we've probably got like 3 more prime A.J. Brown seasons left. As far as how to acquire A.J. Brown, my first suggestion is a really simple pivot. The market seems to prefer Garrett Wilson. Maybe there's a little more steam with the recent contract. I would prefer A.J. Brown straight up. I just have concerns about the Jets offense, both in the near term and the long term, as far as the passing volume, the quarterback situation. I would rather have A.J. Brown. That's an easy swap for me to make, especially if I'm a strong contender. My second suggestion would be to tier up. T. Higgins, I think, is the easiest candidate for this. If you can do T. Higgins plus a second for A.J. Brown, that's a trade I'm happy to make. But you could also look a little bit lower at Devonta Smith, Rome Odunze, Zay Flowers, even Terry McLaurin, DK Metcalf. Try to tier up from one of those wide receivers to A.J. Brown. And then my final suggestion would be to consolidate. Take some guys that you have on your bench or even in your starting lineup where you can patch those holes later with cheaper options. If you can put together a Jordan Addison and a Jerry Jeudy, or a Chuba Hubbard and a DJ Moore, and you can package these 2 players together that are going to give you usable but not elite production, and you can go up and get A.J. Brown, I think that's a great move to really upgrade one spot in your lineup and boost your overall ceiling. Anyway, that's going to do it for today, guys. I hope you found those suggestions helpful. As always, thank you so much for watching the video. Thank you for supporting the channel. If you enjoy my content, please go ahead and hit that subscribe button. Help me get up to my next goal of 9,000 subscribers. And if you want even more Dynasty content from me, you can check out the link in the description to become a YouTube member. That'll give you access to weekly live streams, private channels on the Pure Potential Discord, as well as my top 200 Dynasty rankings. Either way, I'll be back soon with another Dynasty video, and I hope I'll see you then.